So if you were to take a standard economic model, right, and plug in a few specific variables, like a massive landmass, basically zero arable land, and just lethally extreme cold,
Right.
the result you'd expect, according to basically every textbook, is a developing subsistence-level society. I mean, standard development economics operates almost like physics in this regard.
Yeah, it really does.
Low population density plus a super harsh climate almost universally equals a population that's, just struggling to survive, relying on basic subsistence farming, maybe a bit of local bartering,
Yeah.
and heavy reliance on outside aid just to keep the lights on. It's logical, it's clean, and it's what we expect.
Well, it is the standard baseline expectation, right? I mean, we like our economic rules to be universal.
Yeah, we like things to fit in neat little boxes.
Exactly. We assume that wealth generation inherently requires a temperate climate or, navigable rivers for internal trade, massive tracts of fertile soil to feed a growing industrial base, and, of course, a really dense population to serve as both your labor force and your consumer market.
Yeah, people to make the stuff and people to buy the stuff.
Precisely. So when you strip all of those variables away, the standard models just predict poverty.
But there is one specific stretch of rock that completely breaks that global economic calculator.
Yeah.
And that is exactly what we are looking at in our deep dive today.
It really is a fascinating case study.
Oh, it's mind-bending.
Yeah.
We are analyzing a comprehensive, multidimensional academic report based on World Bank data that maps out the socioeconomic development and the environmental challenges of Greenland.
Yeah.
And the mission of this deep dive today is to really unpack this, to establish a global perspective on a place that is vastly underpopulated, highly dependent on natural resources, heavily restricted by extreme environment, and yet somehow incredibly wealthy.
It's the absolute definition of an economic anomaly. I mean, to understand how they actually pull this off, we really have to look completely past our geographical biases.
Right, forget everything you think you know about the Arctic.
Exactly. We have to examine the mechanical reality of how this society functions. The data series we're looking at today strips away those romanticized myths of the frozen north and exposes the cold, hard operational reality.
Which is an economy that has somehow monetized one of the most hostile environments on Earth.
Yeah.
Okay, let's unpack this because the sheer scale of the data immediately throws your spatial awareness for a loop.
It really does.
The World Bank classifies Greenland as a high-income economy, and it officially designates it within the Europe and Central Asia region.
Right, which feels a bit strange geographically, but economically it makes sense.
Yeah, but to really grasp what that high-income status means, you have to understand the physical playing field here.
The geography.
Exactly. The data set lists Greenland's total surface area at roughly 2.1 million square kilometers. For context for you listening, that is massive. It's about a quarter of the size of the contiguous United States. But, and this is the crazy part, there's a tiny fascinating footnote in the land data. When they calculate the actual land area the terrain that a human being can realistically stand on, build a road on, or put a house on, that number plummets to roughly 410,450 square kilometers.
Yeah, and that footnote is basically the physical constraint that defines their entire civilization.
It's wild.
It is. That 410,000 square kilometers only refers to the rocky coastal fringes that are actually free from ice.
Just the edges.
Just the edges. The remaining 1.7 million square kilometers is permanently buried under the Greenland ice sheet. And we aren't talking about, a thin layer of winter snow.
Yeah, no.
We are talking about a monolithic block of glacial ice that is, in some places, over 2 miles thick. It is literally so heavy that it physically depresses the bedrock of the island below sea level.
Oh, wow. So when we talk about this high-income economy, we are not talking about a sprawling, interconnected nation with highways and farmland.
Not at all.
We are talking about a society clinging entirely to the rocky coastline. You've got the freezing ocean on one side and an impassable 2-mile-high wall of ice on the other. It's an economy built on the absolute fringe.
Which perfectly sets up the core tension of this whole report. How do you generate world-class high-income wealth when over 80% of your sovereign territory is fundamentally uninhabitable?
Right. If you have that much money, it has to be coming from somewhere. But it's obviously not from farming the ice.
Exactly.
So let's dive into the steady engine of their Arctic wealth, looking specifically at their economic growth and income. Because the growth curve isn't just a slow crawl.
No, it's very robust.
Yeah, looking at the constant 2015 US dollars, Greenland's GDP has seen a really steady, aggressive expansion. It grew from roughly the $900 million range in the early 1970s to over $2.8 billion in 2021.
They essentially tripled their real economic output, and the key word there is real.
Right, because of inflation.
Exactly. When economists look at isolated economies that are heavily reliant on imported goods, the immediate suspicion is inflation.
Oh, for sure. If you have to fly in every single piece of construction equipment, every laptop, every piece of fresh fruit, the baseline cost of living is going to be exorbitant.
Right. A single apple could cost the equivalent of $5.
Yeah, which means a high GDP might just be a mathematical illusion. Like if the ingredients cost 5 times as much, the economic pie looks bigger on paper, but the people aren't actually any richer. It's just an inflation trap.
Precisely. And that is why the data cross-references this growth with the GDP deflator.
Which is set at 100 for 2015, right?
Yes. The deflator is an incredibly useful tool here. While a standard consumer price index just tracks a basket of household goods, the GDP deflator measures the price changes of all goods and services produced domestically.
Okay, I see.
By using that metric, the data strips away the noise of volatile global pricing.
Yeah.
It proves that this tripling of their GDP from 900 million to 2.8 billion is a genuine increase in the volume of value they are creating.
It's not just a byproduct of rising prices.
Exactly. It is not an inflation illusion. They are producing vastly more real wealth.
Which brings us to what that wealth looks like on an individual level. Now, I want you listening to guess what the average wealth is in a place covered in ice.
It's higher than you think.
Way higher.
Oh.
In 2021, the GDP per capita in current U.S. dollars hit an astonishing $54,570.
Yeah, it's incredible.
But wait, I want to apply some skepticism here.
Yeah.
Because GDP per capita is just taking the massive national pie and dividing it by the tiny population.
Right, an average.
Yeah. If a few massive corporations are making billions and just exporting it out of the country, the GDP per capita looks huge. But the locals could still be poor. Did the data actually show that the citizens hold this wealth?
That is exactly the right question to ask. And what's fascinating here is that the data provides a safeguard metric for exactly this scenario.
Okay, what is it?
It's the gross national income, or GNI, per capita. Specifically, it uses the Atlas method.
The Atlas method, okay.
Yeah, it smooths out exchange rate fluctuations over a 3-year moving average to give a highly accurate picture of relative global purchasing power.
Gotcha.
GNI calculates the income actually retained by the residents of the country, regardless of where the economic activity takes place, and it subtracts the income sent abroad by foreign corporations.
Ah, so it strips out that corporate extraction we were worried about.
Exactly. And their GNI per capita has been rock solid at over $34,000 since 2015.
Wow.
Yeah, and pushing significantly higher in strong market years. Why this matters to you, the listener, is that when you think of harsh, isolated environments, you usually think of subsistence living.
Right, people just barely scraping by.
But Greenland shatters this assumption. They hold a firm position well above the threshold for high-income nations. This establishes a baseline of undeniable, highly localized wealth.
Okay, but the mechanics of how they generate that wealth is where the standard economic model completely fractures from
No,
it.
absolutely.
If you have a $54,000 per capita GDP, but you can't plant wheat, you can't mine easily because of the permafrost, and you have virtually no flat land for sprawling megafactories, where is the money coming from?
It requires a highly asymmetrical economic architecture. The report breaks down their GDP composition, and the proportions are incredibly skewed compared to, say, a diverse continental economy.
Yeah, the data breaks it down perfectly. Services drive a massive 60.9% of their total economy.
Which is huge.
Then you have agriculture, forestry, and fishing, which, given the geography, we can safely assume is almost entirely commercial fishing, making up about 16.5%. And then industry, which includes manufacturing and construction, sits at a microscopic 1.4%.
And that 1.4% industrial figure is the telltale sign of their entire strategy. They have virtually zero domestic manufacturing base.
Nothing.
Right. They aren't building cars. They aren't assembling consumer electronics. They aren't even really producing basic household goods.
I like to compare their economy to a specialized boutique.
Yeah.
They don't manufacture everything. They provide services to their people, and they extract very specific, high-value resources from the sea and earth.
That is a perfect framework for understanding it. They know exactly what their geographic advantage is.
Which is?
Access to pristine, freezing, nutrient-rich Arctic waters, So they have industrialized their fishing sector to an elite degree. We aren't talking about small wooden boats here.
Right.
We are talking about massive, high-tech factory trawlers that catch, process, flash freeze, and package cold water shrimp and Greenland halibut while they are still at sea.
Oh, wow. Which entirely explains that massive service sector. That 60.9% isn't just, retail shops and restaurants in town.
No, not at all.
It's the incredibly complex logistical and administrative tale required to support this hyper-specialized export model, right?
Precisely. If your entire economy relies on exporting flash-frozen shrimp to Paris or Tokyo,
Yeah.
you need world-class ports. You need specialized shipping logistics, highly trained maritime lawyers, quota management systems, and a massive public sector to distribute that wealth and maintain the infrastructure. The service sector is the support system for their singular economic engine.
But that hyper-specialized export model forces them to look outward. Since they manufacture almost nothing domestically, they have to import almost everything they need to survive.
Everything. Literally every single thing.
The lumber to build their homes, the diesel to run their ships, the servers for their internet, every single piece of medical equipment, it all has to be brought in on a boat or a plane.
Which means they have to export at a massive scale to balance that trade deficit. And when you look at the trade data, their integration into the global economy is absolute. Trade makes up a massive percentage of their GDP.
And what is truly revealing is who they are trading with. I found this statistic just staggering.
Yeah, it's a very specific market.
The data shows that an overwhelming 96.9% of their exports go directly to other high-income economies. They are exclusively doing business in the VIP lounge of the global economy.
They have to. I mean, cold water shrimp and premium halibut are luxury proteins. You cannot sell those at scale to developing nations. The price point is simply too high.
That makes sense.
Furthermore, their emerging mineral exports like rare earth elements and specialized ores, these are critical materials for advanced technology manufacturing.
Right, for electronics and green tech.
Exactly. The only reliable buyers for these exports are Western Europe, North America, and highly developed Asian markets.
But, and here's my pushback, I look at this setup and my immediate reaction is terror. This feels incredibly fragile.
Oh, it is.
The data points out a huge vulnerability. The export of ores and metals shows wild, violent fluctuations year over year. Doesn't that make them incredibly vulnerable to global market swings?
Yes,
I
absolutely.
mean, if the price of a specific mineral plummets in London, or shifting ocean temperatures move the shrimp populations out of their territorial waters, doesn't their entire GDP take a direct, unmitigated hit?
You have correctly identified the structural terror of the Greenlandic economy. Yes. This extreme resource dependency is the precarious tightrope they walk every single day.
It's all on the line.
Economists often warn about concentration risk. When you lack a diversified industrial base, an external shock doesn't just hurt one sector, it threatens the entire sovereign budget.
Right, because there's no backup industry to lean on.
Exactly. If global commodity prices drop, or if a major geopolitical event disrupts shipping lanes to Europe, the revenue that pays for their hospitals, their schools, and their heating oil dries up almost instantly. It is a high-reward, high-risk economic reality, making their high-income status a constant balancing act.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Because to manage this balancing act, to run that elite, hyper-focused export market, it requires a highly functional workforce.
It does.
And when you pivot from the money to the people actually living there, you encounter one of the most bizarre demographic paradoxes in the world.
The demographic profile is just as extreme as the geography.
Let's look at the sheer numbers. A total population of just around 56,000 people. You could fit the entire population of this island into a mid-sized college football stadium and still have thousands of empty seats.
And when you distribute those 56,000 people across the 410,000 square kilometers of ice-free land, you arrive at a population density of 0.14 people per square kilometer.
0.14, that is just...
It's empty. To visualize that, imagine taking a 10-kilometer by 10-kilometer square of land and only allowing one single human being to live inside it.
It sounds like absolute rugged isolation.
Yeah.
But the demographic momentum is shifting. The data shows that their natural population growth rate has basically flatlined.
Yeah, it even hit a negative rate of -0.05% in 2021.
So they are not replacing their population organically.
No, which normally signals a catastrophic economic decline. A shrinking population usually means a shrinking tax base and a severe labor shortage.
But the data throws a massive curveball here. Despite the negative growth rate, the working-age population, those between the ages of 15 and 64, makes up over 60% of their entire demographic pyramid.
It's a demographic squeeze.
Yeah, how is that mechanically possible? If you aren't having children, how is your labor force so massively inflated?
It's the result of a very specific migration pattern linked to their high income status. Greenland operates as a magnet for specialized labor, particularly from Denmark and other parts of Europe.
Oh, migrant experts.
Exactly. Engineers, medical professionals, maritime experts, administrators, they migrate to Greenland for highly lucrative specialized contracts.
Right.
They arrive during their prime working years, contribute massively to the economic output, but often leave before they reach retirement age. Or they simply choose not to raise large families in such a harsh, expensive environment.
So the working age bucket stays full because they are essentially importing the exact demographics they need to run the export machine.
Yes.
But here is the data point that completely shattered my mental image of Greenland.
The urbanization.
Yes. I pictured those 56,000 people spread out over the 410,000 square kilometers, living in solitary cabins on the edge of a fjord, living this rugged, decentralized lifestyle.
Right, everyone in absolute isolation.
Yeah, but the data shows the exact opposite. In 2021, the urban population accounted for a staggering 87.3% of the total population.
And the historical trend line is even more revealing. Over just a few decades, their urbanization rate skyrocketed from around 70% to almost 90%.
Wow.
They are rapidly abandoning the rural fringes and consolidating.
But why? I mean, you have 410,000 square kilometers of open rock. Why is almost 90% of the population huddled into a handful of dense towns and small cities?
Because the harsh geography forces people together. You cannot easily survive alone on the ice. Let's think about the actual physical mechanics of living in a sub-zero environment.
Okay.
You need reliable heat, you need clean drinking water, and you need a way to dispose of sewage.
The basics, yeah.
In a temperate climate, you can build a house in the woods, dig a well, and install a septic tank. You cannot do that when the ground is solid permafrost.
Because it's literally frozen rock.
Exactly. You cannot bury pipes because the ground will shift and they will freeze and shatter.
Right, I read about this. In places like Greenland, they have to use above-ground insulated pipe systems, sometimes called utilidors, to transport water and sewage.
Yes.
And those systems have to be constantly heated, right?
Exactly. And you simply cannot afford to build a 10-mile continuously heated, insulated pipeline to service one single remote cabin. The infrastructure costs are astronomical.
That makes total sense.
Therefore, to provide a modern, high-income standard of living, flush toilets, running water, reliable electricity, high-speed internet, the population has to be tightly clustered. It is a phenomenon we can call extreme clustered urbanization.
The environment literally forces human beings to huddle together.
Yeah.
It is entirely an engineering constraint. You centralize to survive.
Yes, and beyond basic survival and economic participation require highly concentrated settlements. You cannot run a complex maritime legal office or a modern hospital from a remote hunting camp. The high-income economy demands physical proximity.
But with everyone clustered in these urban centers, how does that impact the quality of life in the workforce?
It creates some unique public health dynamics.
Let's look at the health data, because this is where the friction of the Arctic really shows up. The data lists the total life expectancy at birth at roughly 71.5 years. Now, I want to voice some strong skepticism here. For a country classified as high income, 71.5 years actually feels remarkably low.
It is lower than average for that bracket.
Yeah, most of Western Europe and highly developed Asian nations are pushing well past 80 years. Why? The massive disconnect. If they have the money, why aren't they living as long as the Danes or the Swiss?
It's a crucial observation. And there is a notable gender gap in the data that gives us our first clue.
Okay.
Females live to about 73.4 years, while males live to about 69.7 years. That gap points directly to occupational hazards.
Ah, the fishing.
Exactly. The Greenlandic economy relies heavily on commercial fishing and resource extraction. These are inherently dangerous professions. Working on a freezing trawler in the North Atlantic comes with a high mortality rate compared to working in an office in Copenhagen.
So sheer occupational danger is dragging the male average down.
Yes, but there is also a deeper, more complex public health challenge related to extreme isolation. Wealth cannot instantly solve the psychological friction of the Arctic.
Right, the darkness, the harshness.
Exactly. But there is a silver lining in the health data regarding how people are dying. The cause of death data shows a massive epidemiological shift. Non-communicable diseases are now the primary cause of mortality.
Which means things like heart disease or cancer, rather than infectious disease.
Yes. And to a public health statistician, that shift from communicable to non-communicable diseases is the classic statistical signature of a developed, high-income public health system.
Because surviving long enough to get heart disease means you aren't dying of cholera at age 5.
Precisely. It means their urban clustering works, their vaccination programs, their maternal care, their sanitation systems. They are incredibly effective. It proves that their healthcare infrastructure is functioning at a high-income level.
And to run that healthcare system, and the fisheries and the complex trade networks, you need an incredibly capable workforce.
You really do.
The labor data shows a participation rate holding steady above 60% for those aged 15 and older. And the gender gap in labor participation is shrinking rapidly, meaning women are integrated deeply into the formal economy.
Yes.
But what stood out to me was the intellectual capital. The report points to a significantly high number of researchers per million people. Why does a society that exports frozen fish need a massive density of researchers?
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture, surviving and monetizing the Arctic is fundamentally an ongoing scientific experiment.
How so?
When you are dealing with shifting fish migrations due to climate change, you need marine biologists to calculate sustainable quotas. When you are trying to build heavy infrastructure on permafrost that is slowly melting, you need elite geologists and civil engineers.
You can't just pour concrete and hope for the best.
Exactly. A high-income service economy in an extreme environment requires a highly educated, highly specialized workforce.
Okay, so we have 56,000 highly educated, highly urbanized people living in tightly clustered modern towns, generating elite wealth.
Right.
But to keep those towns running, to power the hospitals, heat the utilidors, and keep the factory trawlers operating requires an absolute mountain of power.
Massive amounts of energy.
How do they keep the lights on without destroying their pristine environment?
Hmm.
This brings us to what I consider the most fascinating logistical triumph in the entire World Bank dataset.
The energy and environmental data is really where Greenland truly separates itself from almost every other developing or isolated nation on Earth.
The baseline energy access numbers are flawless. They have achieved 100% access to electricity across the population. No one is left in the dark. And nearly 100% access to clean cooking fuels. Nobody's burning raw wood or toxic biomass inside their homes for warmth.
Achieving 100% grid reliability in an environment where losing heat for 12 hours can mean infrastructure collapse and mass casualties is just an engineering marvel.
But my immediate assumption was that they achieved this by just importing millions of barrels of heavy diesel fuel and running massive, dirty generators 247.
And historically, that was largely true.
But the data points to a massive structural leap. The crown jewel of this report is that renewable energy production has, at times, exceeded 77% of their total generation. 77%.
And it is driven almost entirely by localized hydropower.
Let's break down the mechanics of that, because building a dam in an environment that freezes solid for half the year sounds impossible. How are they doing this?
They are essentially using the geography against itself. The massive Greenland ice sheet produces tremendous volumes of subglacial meltwater.
Right.
Because the coastal areas are incredibly steep and rocky, this creates high-pressure, high-velocity water flows. Engineers have built specialized hydroelectric facilities that tap directly into these meltwater lakes.
So it's like capturing the power of the ice itself. They're plugging their power grid directly into the glacial melt rather than relying solely on imported diesel.
Exactly. Now, the engineering is incredibly complex. You have to build reservoirs that won't freeze solid, you have to insulate the turbine systems, and you have to construct localized, independent microgrids.
Because there's no national grid connecting all the towns.
Right.
Sure.
The geography makes running thousands of miles of transmission lines impossible. Each major urban cluster has to have its own dedicated power source. But by investing massive capital into these localized hydropower plants, they have drastically reduced their reliance on fossil fuels.
Which is reflected directly in their environmental footprint. The data tracks their greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah.
And post-2015, it fluctuates around 1.16 million tons of CO2 equivalent.
Very low.
Yeah. Now, methane has seen a slight increase since 1990. But the really impressive metric is their PM2.5 exposure. The dangerous particulate matter in the air that causes respiratory disease.
Right.
It sits incredibly low, around 6 to 7 micrograms per cubic meter. That is well below the World Health Organization's danger zones.
And when you analyze that emissions data alongside their GDP growth, you witness a massive economic victory in the data.
Decoupling.
Exactly. Decoupling. For over a century, the iron law of industrial economics was that GDP growth and carbon emissions were inextricably locked together.
If you wanted to make more money, you had to burn more coal or oil.
Precisely. The carbon intensity of your GDP, how much carbon you emit per dollar of wealth created, remains static. But the data shows Greenland's carbon intensity line falling sharply.
So they are tripling their GDP, but their emissions are barely moving or even shrinking per dollar. They are successfully decoupling economic growth from carbon emissions.
Yes.
They're getting drastically richer without getting proportionally dirtier.
By leveraging hydropower, they insulate their sovereign budget from the wild price swings of the global oil market while simultaneously preserving the pristine local environment that their high-value seafood exports rely on.
It is brilliant. But executing a complex transition like that, from a resource-dependent economy to a green, high-income society, requires a really steady hand at the wheel.
It requires stellar governance.
Yeah, if the government is corrupt, the money from the shrimp and the minerals just disappears into offshore bank accounts, and the hydropower dams never get built. Let's look at the invisible architecture holding this all together, their governance.
Governance is the ultimate variable in development economics. And in Greenland's case, it is the fundamental reason they are a high-income society.
The World Bank uses the Worldwide Governance Indicators, or WGI, to measure this. And Greenland's metrics are stellar.
They really are.
We are talking about control of corruption consistently ranking around the 82nd to 84th percentile globally. Rule of law hits an incredible 95th percentile. And regulatory quality is completely stable.
Which is vital, because this raises an important question regarding the resource curse.
Oh, right. Let's explain the mechanics of the resource curse, because it is the trap that catches almost every developing nation that suddenly strikes it rich.
The resource curse occurs when a nation discovers a massive deposit of a valuable natural resource, like oil in Venezuela or diamonds in parts of sub-Saharan Africa. The sudden influx of foreign wealth artificially inflates the local currency, which destroys the competitiveness of any other domestic industry. But more insidiously, it destroys the political incentive for good governance.
Because the government no longer needs to tax the citizens to generate revenue. They just take a cut of the oil money.
Exactly.
And when you don't need to tax the citizens, you stop caring about their education, their health care, or their infrastructure.
Precisely. The wealth concentrates at the top. The democratic institutions hollow out, corruption skyrockets, and the general population often ends up poorer and more oppressed than before the resource was discovered.
But Greenland has a massive influx of resource wealth from fishing and minerals and a tiny population. The mathematical setup for the resource curse is perfect. Why didn't they fall into the trap?
Because they established their democratic institutions and the rule of law before they industrialized their resource extraction. Greenland proves a vital economic theory. Wealth doesn't create stability. Stability creates wealth. They built the vault, the 95th percentile rule of law, the transparent judicial system, before they started stacking the gold inside.
So the WGI data isn't just a nice scorecard. Greenland's exceptional governance is the literal bedrock, or I guess ice shelf, holding its high-income status together.
Exactly. It ensures that the revenue from halibut catch is taxed fairly, deposited transparently, and used to fund a hospital or a hydropower plant.
But even the most robust operating system faces hardware degradation over time. And the data does point to some serious structural vulnerabilities that this government is going to have to navigate very carefully. The darker trend lines.
Yes, the report outlines a slow-moving demographic and infrastructural collision that will test their governance to its absolute limits.
The most glaring threat is the aging population. We discussed the flatlining birth rate and the heavy reliance on imported working-age migrants. But the old-age dependency ratio, which calculates the ratio of older, non-working dependents to the active working-age population, is skyrocketing.
It's a huge issue.
It went from a mere 3.7% a few decades ago to over 15.8% recently. The workforce is carrying a heavier and heavier financial burden of retirees.
And you have to connect this demographic weight with the geographic isolation. The data tracks fixed capital formation, which is the economic term for the investment in long-term physical infrastructure like roads, ports, utilidors, and hospitals.
Right.
In Greenland, this metric fluctuates wildly.
Why the wild volatility?
Because building on the Arctic fringe is uniquely difficult. You have maybe 3 to 4 months where the weather permits major outdoor concrete pours or heavy earth moving.
That is a tiny window.
It is. If a supply ship carrying steel gets delayed by sea ice, your entire construction project is pushed back a year. Furthermore, climate change is melting the permafrost, which physically destabilizes existing building foundations.
So you have a shrinking tax base, an aging population that requires more healthcare, and physical infrastructure that is decaying due to climate change and astronomically expensive to replace. How will an aging population manage in a harsh environment that requires constant, expensive infrastructure upkeep?
It is the ultimate stress test for their economic model. They will have to continuously increase the efficiency of their specialized export sectors just to maintain their current standard of living. It's a constant race against demographic and environmental decline.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground here, from the physics of glacial dams to the macroeconomic theory of the resource curse.
We really have.
So what does this all mean? When we step back from the spreadsheets and the data, how do we synthesize the reality of this society?
Yeah.
Looking at the entirety of this World Bank data set, I see three profound takeaways.
The data absolutely forms a cohesive narrative of survival and adaptation.
First, we have high-income resilience. Maintaining an average of over $54,000 in per capita wealth while importing almost every manufactured good required for survival despite extreme geographic and environmental pressures is an astonishing logistical feat.
Truly elite level.
Second, they are a green pioneer, achieving deep decarbonization in the electricity sector through aggressive engineering of hydropower in a sub-zero environment. They have proven that it is mechanically possible to decouple high-income urbanization from carbon emissions.
It's a huge achievement.
And third, their institutional advantage. World-class governance acting as the ballast for the entire nation. Their 95th percentile rule of law proves that institutional integrity is the ultimate defense against the resource curse.
It is a masterclass in maximizing constraints. They have looked at a list of geographical impossibilities and engineered a high-income civilization out of them.
Exactly. I want you, listening to this right now, to really internalize why this data matters to you. Greenland isn't just some quirky anomaly on the edge of the map, or a trivia answer about ice sheets. It is a real-time, high-stakes demonstration of human ingenuity.
It really is.
It proves that economic prosperity isn't just about having perfect farmland and temperate weather. It's about how intelligently and transparently a society organizes itself to solve the unique, lethal problems of its environment.
And if we look forward, I want to leave the listener with a final thought to ponder. As climate change forces humanity to consider inhabiting increasingly extreme environments, from rising coastlines to extreme heat zones to perhaps even other planets centuries from now, Greenland isn't just an isolated island.
Right.
It might be humanity's most successful, battle-tested blueprint for building a high-tech, high-income, sustainable society in a place where nature explicitly does not want you to live.
Stability creates wealth, and ingenuity ensures survival. That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it. Well, that brings us to the end of our analysis. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the source material. We hope it entirely changed how you look at the map, and we encourage you to keep questioning the data, the assumptions, and the seemingly unbreakable economic rules around you. Catch you on the next one.